and discuss about a day of reflection to each and every one of us, most especially the youth of this nation. It's quite disheartening that we do not have majority of them yet on board, but we hope to have all of them on board while we have this national dialogue amongst ourselves. This is more than important because, to a large extent, Gambia has deviated from patriotism, nationalism, to individualism, a concept of which needs to be changed as soon as that we can, to ensure we will be able to give our nation what is expected of it. And that being the case, we're much obliged to have been given our contribution and support in this partner to ensure that the national dialogue becomes a success. People like me, our youth and children, we expect to sit down, learn from the veterans of our nation, being educated and being reminded of why we call them Gambia and why we are the factor at the smiling coast of Africa. And that being said, I wish to welcome each and every one of you to the University of Gambia, a country of law, as in my capacity as President of the Union. And we hope that we have a fruitful discussion today. And as we leave this hall, we'll not be able to share with the rest of our colleagues within the university and beyond, and ensuring that we build the spirit of patriotism and nationalism, inshallah. Thank you.
Galan, the host, and also for being part of the partners and conveners for this important engagement. I'd like to, at this juncture, invite Uncle Madi to give us the opening statement.
Good morning. My fellow beloved compatriots, on behalf of all our partners in this event today, namely Edward Francis Moore Center for Rights and Justice, Malagan, Askanwi Media, Gambians Against Looted Assets Gala, InfoCheck, UTG Student Union, the Solo Sandem Foundation, the Never Again Network, and Team Gomsapopa. I join Galan to warmly welcome you all to this Independence and Democracy Forum. We gather today not merely to commemorate 61 years of independence, but to examine it. Independence is not an annual ritual. It is a permanent obligation. It is not the lowering of one flag and the raising of another. It is the sustained construction of a republic that protects dignity, guarantees justice, and delivers shared prosperity. It is highly indebted, aid-dependent, tax-burdened, and yet persistently impoverished and corrupt in lived reality. This is a structural contradiction. We are well endowed with natural and human resources, yet governance outcomes do not reflect that potential. Our present condition did not begin in 2017, nor in 1994. Its roots trace back to 18 February 1965. At independence, and certainly by 1970, when we became a republic, this nation required a foundational national conversation to ask the fundamental questions. What kind of republic did we want? What kind of citizen did we need? And what values would define the Gambian state and society? Imagine from slavery and colonialism, systems that disrupted our political evolution and fractured our social fabric. We inherited a colonial state with all the paraphernalia of monarchy imposed upon us. With low literacy levels and limited institutional capacity, the urgent task was not simply political independence, but civic reconstruction. That conversation never took place. Our history has presented us with critical moments for national redefinition. The most decisive of these were 1965 and 1970. On 18 February 1965, we gained independence. But independence was treated primarily as a constitutional transfer of authority, not as a civic transformation. The colonial state structure remained largely intact. Administrative systems, legal frameworks, and socio-political hierarchies were preserved. What was required at that time was a foundational national conversation. What kind of republic should replace the colonial state? What civic values must define the new Gambian citizen? How do we dismantle inherited systems of division and inequality? Instead, we transitioned into self-rule without reimagining the character of the state or the nature of citizenship. Then we got to 1970. In 1970, we became a republic. This was an even greater opportunity for for constitutional and civic renewal. Becoming a republic should have triggered a comprehensive societal dialogue about sovereignty, equality, and national identity. A republic is not merely the absence of a monarch, it is the assertion that the people are supreme. Yet the transformation from colony to republic did not fundamentally redefine power relations, governance standards, and national identity. A republic, I repeat that, yet the transformation from colony to republic did not fundamentally redefine power relations, governance standards, or social justice commitments. We gained republican status, but we did not reconstruct the republic. Therefore, we became a republic without any orientation. Then in 1981, the events of 1981 signaled deep dissatisfaction within segments of our society. Some people felt something was fundamentally wrong with this country, that they had to use all means or any means to change it. It was a warning that something was fundamentally misaligned. Rather than undertaking a national diagnostic process, we move forward with limited institutional adjustments. Commissions were established and reports were hardly implemented. Then we go to 1994. A coup without national reflection. The military coup of 1994 exposed institutional fragility and political decay. Commissions were established, but again, there was no broad-based citizen dialogue to redesign the state. The transition to the Second Republic occurred without addressing foundational structural issues. And we move on until 2017. The democratic transition of 2017 marked a historic victory for popular will. Transitional justice mechanisms were established, civic space expanded, and fear receded. Yet 9 years later, while institutions have changed, the deeper civic and structural transformation remains incomplete. Transitional justice must do more than prosecute and compensate. Rather, it must reshape culture, governance norms, and citizens-state relationships. So what has been the pattern since 1965? Across to 1970, 1981, 1994, and 2017. One pattern is clear. We respond to crisis, we establish commissions, and then we move on. But we will not fundamentally reimagine the republic. The most consequential missed opportunities were 1965 and 1970 because those were foundational moments. If the foundation is weak, each successive reform sits on an unstable ground. The question before us today, therefore, is whether we will continue this pattern or finally undertake a deep national conversation that has eluded. To further elucidate and better comprehend these issues, one has to look at our constitutions. From 1965 through 1970 and into the 1997 constitutional order, our governing framework largely preserved a powerful centralized state rather than constructing a sovereign citizen at the core of the republic. Independence in 1965 transferred authority from colonial administrators to local elites, but it did not fundamentally restructure the architecture of power. In 1970, the Republican Constitution, while symbolically severing monarchical ties, maintained a permanent executive military rule, restored multi-party politics, yet again entrenched expansive presidential powers. Across these three constitutional moments, the emphasis remained on the state, control, and executive authority, not on diffusing power, deepening accountability, or cultivating empowered citizenship as the primary source of sovereignty. This persistent state-centric design lies at the heart of our national monnaies. A democratic state is not defined merely by periodic elections, but by the primacy of citizens whose rights, agency, and participation shape governance. When constitutional arrangements concentrate authority rather than disperse it, institutions become vulnerable, accountability weakens, and public trust erodes. The result is a republic where sovereignty is proclaimed in law, but diluted in practice. While the state remains strong, yet the citizen remains structurally fragile. Until constitutional reform replaces or places the sovereign citizen and not the powerful executive at the center of governance, our democratic project will continue to struggle to deliver justice, equality, and shared prosperity. Beyond the political and the constitutional situation, the central challenge in our republic is also socio-cultural. Subsection 2 of the Constitution affirms that sovereignty resides in the people. Lived reality tells a different story. Our society remains deeply unequal and exclusionary. Citizens continue to face marginalization based on tribe, gender, religion, disability, caste, origin, age, and economic status, among others. Patriarchy and entrenched socio-cultural hierarchies distort the promise of constitutional equality. Democracy cannot flourish where society itself is structurally unequal. These issues, fellow compatriots, highlight the importance, the urgency, and the necessity of a national dialogue. Such a national dialogue cannot and should not be controlled by the executive, but by the people, and driven by the people. For this reason, the Edward Francis Moore Center has submitted a position paper to the Office of the President, calling for the restructuring and the review of the national dialogue that they launched since 2024. While we welcome the dialogue in principle, such a process must be anchored in law, that is, established by an act of the National Assembly, governed by clear terms of reference and bound by a defined time frame. Only then can it facilitate authentic national conversation aimed at building a just and an inclusive republic. Therefore, this forum we are having, why it matters. This forum does not claim to replace a national dialogue. We seek to ignite one. We call upon Gambians at home and abroad in the diaspora to organize similar forums, to create spaces for frank, citizen-led reflection about the state and future of our republic. Nation building is not the exclusive duty of the government. It is a shared responsibility of every citizen. The Gambia is not insulated from global pressures, be they economic volatility, geopolitical shifts, climate vulnerability, among other factors. In such a context, silence is irresponsible and dangerous. We require honest debate about how to safeguard unity, stability, and prosperity. Across the First Republic, the Second Republic, and the post-2017 transition, progress has occurred, no doubt. Civic space has widened, fear has receded, expression is freer today. Yet, poverty persists. Youth unemployment remains high, the cost of living strains households. Public service delivery is uneven, institutions are fragile, corruption endures, and public trust remains low. Various studies have been conducted in this country to validate these points. Democracy cannot survive on ceremony and symbolism. It has to produce results. This forum, therefore, is neither a defiance nor ceremonial, but a demonstration of duty and patriotism required of each and every Gambian. We are here to question, to challenge, to listen, and to propose. At the conclusion of our deliberations, we will adopt a citizens' charter for democratic renewal and national dignity as a living document articulating our shared values, defining expectations of public authority, and clarifying our own duties as citizens. We state unequivocally that democracy belongs to the people who bear the primary duty to defend, to protect, and to deliver it. Therefore, we are here to repair our own house, to define our own standards, and to claim our own future. As I conclude, I thank each and every one of you present here, not as spectators, not as mere audience, but as patriotic stakeholders in the destiny of this nation. Let us engage with intellectual honesty. Let us disagree with respect. Let us deliberate with courage. And let us depart from here with clarity and commitment. On that note, it is my singular honor to formally declare the Independence and Democracy Forum 2026 open for the Gambia, our homeland. I thank you very much.
Uncle Madi, for that detailed background and detailed concept, taking cue from where we started when we gained independence as a country. Key questions that need deep reflections, key points that need to be noted as a country. We've raised the flag, yes, but how far have we gone in raising the dignity of the country and then putting certain course to action for the greater good of the entire citizenry? At this point, we'll take a 5 minutes reflexive break. We'll allow the technician to actually give us a music interlude before we proceed to the other part of this engagement, where we'll be having discussions. And we have two of our moderators already here, that is Uncle T.A. Jao and Auntie Nene Cham, who will be leading the discussion.
And of course, who was supposed to have been only panel is not here, but she is represented by unfortunately, I'm not got your name yet. You are the one who has come of age. We know that as a human being, 61 in this country, one would have retired from service. So, but when we look at the country, where we are and where we are supposed to have been are definitely quite different. Because at the age of 61, the Gambia should have passed this stage in development and many other aspects as well. But unfortunately, for one reason or the other, we are still lagging behind in a number of issues. So far, we've had three governments in this country: the Sadaura government, Yahya Jammeh, and now Adama Barrow. There have been, certain occasions when the Gambia had the opportunity to rejuvenate itself in certain ways. We can remember in 1991 during the Kupa Sambasanyang coup attempt. At least the Gambia had an opportunity because we had the sympathy of the whole world. And not only the sympathy, but we had also got a lot of assistance in terms of resources and a lot of other things. But unfortunately, things were not well managed again, and we kind of reverted back to the old system. Then we had 1994, when Yahya Jammeh and his thugs came to power, and the Gambia actually went on a completely different direction. Well, for 22 years under Yahya Jammeh, we didn't seem to make it what we were supposed to have gone, or rather we have not reached the stage that we were supposed to have reached. Even though the opportunities existed, but mismanagement continued as usual, and corruption also became a bane of the regime. Then came the Barrow regime in 2017. Again, a lot of opportunities were available. We can all recall that, the whole world were with us. They supported the Gambia. They were ready to assist the Gambia. We can remember the donor conference that was held in Geneva. A lot of pledges were made. A lot of money was promised to the Gambia. But I can assure you, not even half of that amount came to the Gambia because the way the government was managing the situation. So the donors were not very impressed. So that's, again, is another lost opportunity. Well, we're supposed to be talking about the governance and 61 years of independence, where did we go wrong? That's the question our panelists are supposed to be answering. And I have absolutely no doubt that they have the capacity to be able to answer those questions. Where did we go wrong? Did we actually go wrong somewhere? Yes, indeed, we went wrong. Because, as I said, the Gambia should not have been at this stage. We should have passed this stage a very, very long time ago. But unfortunately, the situation is that. There are a lot of things, the way they are handled in this country is definitely not the correct way to have done it. A good example in case recently we had the Minister of Basic and Secondary Education telling us about the plan to launch 7 local languages to be taught in our schools. Can you imagine that? What kind of confusion are they bringing in our local schools, in our schools? It's definitely hard to understand. When the Mandinka teacher comes out, then the Manjago teacher comes in, then the Fula teacher comes in. At the end of the day, the children get more confused. So these are all little situations that actually the government should have missed the point. Anyway, I'm just a moderator, so I should now call on the panelists to give us an answer as to where we have gone wrong. As far as our governance system is concerned. As they said, ladies first, so maybe I should start with this summer gifts. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and good morning to you all, to my fellow panelists as well. And as Mr. Denver has stated, I am here in representation of Mrs. Hannah Foster and ACDHRS. So hopefully, with her remarks, I'll be able to answer some of the questions that we have in our minds today. And I'll start by stating or saying again hello to everyone, my distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you warm greetings from the Executive Director of Mrs. Hannah Foster, the African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies, of course, who regrettably could not be present in person this morning. Though she has asked me to convey her appreciation to the organizers and the partners for this convening, which convenes a timely and necessary reflection, as spoken about. My name is Salan Gibbs. I am the Programs Manager for ACHRS, and I'm representing her today. And I thank you for the opportunity to contribute in this important national reflection. The Executive Director has maintained that independence is not merely an anniversary to commemorate, but the standard against which we must continuously measure our governance, institutions, and collective national conscience. It is therefore in the spirit of the responsibility, reflection, and forward-looking reform that I share these remarks on her behalf. As mentioned, 61 years after independence, the Gambia stands at a moment that calls for honesty and proper reflection. The Gambia is sovereign. That is not a question. The deeper question is whether independence is translated into dignity, justice, and accountable governance, and economic security for the majority of Gambians. When we ask where do we go wrong, we must approach the question structurally. This is not about individuals or personalities. It is rather about systems, the institutional and political patterns that have shaped our trajectory across the decades to date. Political independence in 1965 was indeed a historic achievement. However, political sovereignty alone does not guarantee social and economic justice. Across all three political phases of our history, the First and Second Republics, and post-2017 democratic transition, inequality and poverty have remained persistent features of everyday life. Recent years have seen increased public spending and significant borrowing, yet citizens continue to grapple with rising costs of living, an unstable electricity supply, youth unemployment, and gaps in education, health services, and infrastructure. Likewise, the continued migration of young Gambians through irregular routes is a powerful indicator that many do not feel economically secure within the state. At the same time, there have been successes that must be acknowledged. The establishment and operationalization of institutions such as the National Human Rights Commission have strengthened rights discourse. Civil society space has expanded significantly since 2017. Investigative journalism has become more vibrant and explorative, and these are important democratic gains. True empowerment, though, cannot be achieved through independence alone. It must be accompanied by economic justice. The Gambia's governance trajectory reveals another pattern: democratic forms without consistent democratic outcomes. The First Republic delivered electoral continuity, but did not sufficiently institutionalize accountability. The Second Republic introduced constitutional structures and undertook large-scale infrastructure development. Yet that era was also marked by gross human rights violations, deep institutional weakening, and suppression of dissent. The post-2017 transition brought significant successes. Large-scale human rights abuses subsided. The Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission created an unprecedented record of past violations and gave victims a voice. Civic space reopened. political pluralism expanded, and there are certainly meaningful achievements. Yet reform has stalled in key areas as stated by Mr. Moderator. The failure to adopt a new constitution with strengthened term limits the clearer separation of powers was a major setback. Implementation of TRRC recommendations has now been slowed and contested. Executive dominance over the National Assembly remains a concern. Access to information legislation exists, and yet its full potential has not been realized in practice. Whilst democracy has been restored procedurally, transformation remains incomplete. It must be stated that elections alone do not consolidate democracy. Governance must deliver transparency, credible enforcement, and accountability. Institutional fragility remains and is an oversight bodies exist, yet effectiveness often depends on political cooperation rather than guaranteed autonomy. Parliamentary oversight has improved in visibility, but remains constrained by structural imbalances. Recent public debates around procurement practices, public debt levels, and transparency in major contracts demonstrate both progress and weakness. The progress is that these issues are now publicly scrutinized. The weakness is that follow-through and corrective measures are not always clear or timely. Citizens' empowerment has grown in voice, but not always in sustained engagement. Social media activism is vibrant, yet often polarized. Public discourse has become sharper, sometimes drifting into hate speech and identity politics rather than constructive policy debate. Similarly, we must recognize successes. Youth activism, women's advocacy movements, and civil society coalitions have increasingly shaped public discourse. Media freedom has expanded compared to the past. These foundations for a stronger democratic culture. However, where institutions remain weak and polarization deepens, accountability struggles to take root. Although we describe our history in brief political phrases, structural continuity is cut across them. Executive power has remained heavily concentrated. Oversight mechanisms have existed, but have often struggled to function independently of political influence. Patronage-based incentives continue to shape political behavior, sometimes prioritizing loyalty over merit and weakening public trust. Institutional independence remains fragile. The culture of enforcement remains inconsistent, and public scrutiny, though more vocal than ever before, has not translated into systemic pressure. Leadership and political rhetoric have changed, but the underlying architecture of governance has not transformed at the depth required for democratic consolidation. Without confronting these continuities, we risk treating each administration as an isolated episode rather than understanding the deeper institutional patterns that define our trajectory. Now, where do our gaps remain? Upon reflection over this past 60 years, it is evident that the nation did not collapse completely, but rather, particular institutional foundations were never completely established. First, while we established formal checks and balances, the practical resilience of those systems has changed over the years. Oversight institutions have at times depended heavily on political alignment and goodwill rather than asserting structural integrity. Strengthening these safeguards remains an ongoing task. Seven, reform momentum has often been strong at policy level, but less consistent in implementation. We have produced important laws, commissions, and recommendations. The next phase is to ensure that reform is part of regular governance. Third, social and economic justice have not always evolved at the same time as political reform. Thus, many citizens have experienced democracy procedurally through elections, but not always materially in their daily lives. Bridging that gap is central to long-term sustainability and stability. Finally, while citizens' voice has grown significantly, particularly in the post-2017 period, translating civic participation into long-term institutional accountability remains a work in progress. These are not failures of a single government or era. They are structural gaps that have evolved across political periods. Recognizing them honestly is not an act of accusation, it is an act of national responsibility. Our path lies ahead. This conversation must move beyond mere diagnosis. The importance of this forum lies in its potential to produce concrete commitments that are measurable, time-bound, and shared by state and non-state actors. If the citizens' charter that emerges from this gathering is clear, realistic, and sustained through civic monitoring, it can help us shift from reflection to reform. Independence secured our sovereignty. The task before us now is to strengthen accountability and institutional integrity in this next chapter of our democratic journey. As I conclude, allow me to reiterate the principle of the executive director, who's often emphasized in national and regional spaces, that democratic consolidation is not achieved through rhetoric alone. It is achieved through institutions that function, laws that are implemented, and citizens who remain engaged. This forum represents an opportunity not merely to diagnose where we have fallen short, but also to articulate a concrete, shared roadmap for restoration. We can leave this gathering with measurable commitments, clear responsibilities, and a collective willingness to strengthen institutional integrity. When these reflections will have served a purpose. On behalf of the Executive Director and ACDHRS, I do thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this important dialogue. Thank you very much.
We know that African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies has been involved in governance and a lot of other issues in the past. And they've been in this country for a very, very long time. So it is not a surprise that she has given us a good gist of what all these issues are supposed to be. I mean, of course, in her intervention, she acknowledged that there have been few successes, but a lot of things are not going the way they were supposed to have gone. For instance, I mean, she mentioned about weak institutional framework, and that is a problem in this country. As long as the institutions are weak, it would be extremely difficult for governance to be the way it is supposed to be. Anyway, now we call on Dr. Ensa Ture, who is a lecturer at the UTG, and we'll get his perspective on the issue as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It is important today to reflect on the day that actually created a Gambian personality in the political governance. And before that, next time, Mr. Demba, we say ladies first. In such gathering, I think we need to look at the issues chronologically, because he's supposed to come up with historical background that might have actually give us the understanding of how we emerge within the global system. You said that ladies first. I think my topic is supposed to give a background to actually lay the foundation or establish a foundation that might have actually constituted the rise of the end of African independence from the time that we never actually considered. When we talk about Africa, for example, or Gambia within the framework of African continental zone, we are talking about black people, and we're dealing with the independent analysis here. I think it is important for us to go back to link Gambia to primordial and pre-colonial context, because Gambia was actually part of broader West African zone. So therefore, our independence or our subjugation was has been actually similar to those in other parts of the continent. In order to situate what was wrong in our economy, it is important for us to look at what happened until our situation was actually created. Africa began to lose its sovereignty as continental entity since 16th century. But many of us are not talking about that simply because most of the Gambian, about 60% to 70% of Gambia, lack capacity and competence in historical knowledge. In order to understand this thing very well, we're supposed to be conscious of the global system. And within the global system analysis, we'll be able to understand what went wrong. Our independence as people and continental zone began to shrink in the 16th century, owing to our understanding of the global context and economy. 16th century, global economy was actually centered on slavery. And why? Because Africa was actually subjugated, not conquered, but Africa was influenced. And what actually influenced Africa? The 15th century was actually either 150 or 200 years after the downfall of Mali Empire. During the era of Mali, African states were independent and they were not actually subjugated by outside force. Although initial imperialist expansionist policy adopted by Arabs in the 7th to 8th century, they failed because Ghana Empire was able to adopt a kind of territorial and that of a territorial policy that actually repulsed the Arabs' expansionist agenda and imperial agenda. And Ghana exists as an independent zone, controlling all the resources, and they actually monopolized gold nugget, and thus was available. Which can confirm that Ghana was one of the Pan-African states that was first of all created and established against the Arab expansionist policy around the 8th century or 7th century or 8th century. Where we had an independence, they could not penetrate. Just to give you historical background of how our independence was actually affected. In the 13th century, regionally or subcontinental empire emerged under Mali Empire, and they adopted expansionist policy where they radiate their influence over this area, Senegambia area. And all other areas became part of Mali, but Malian policy and whatever was to ensure that people had the capacity to actually influence the state governance. You can understand that the space of history where governance was people-driven, it was not actually state-driven. And this is where our independence was reaffirmed. And that was why, before Sunjata Keita himself became a sovereign imperial emperor, there had to be a constitution in force, that is Kurkan Furka. Although Kurkan Furka is a Mandinka state, Kuru means assembly. So the democracy we are talking even about today, the concept and the condition were already in the pre-colonial space. When they say Kuru means the assembly of the people, Foka means authority. And in the modern time, democracy means authority of the people. It means African had the concept of democracy in their governance well before the rise of modern educational system and political science disciplines and government. So that's why when we are dealing with Africa to assess or examine our independence, our economy, we need to actually link it to broader historical context in order to actually observe the evolution of our domination in the global system and why we are still sovereign and still now we are dependent and we constitute periphery of the world system. Many Gambians don't understand it. That's why the current elite force of this country can never actually change the political and economic direction because failure to understand history. When people don't have the knowledge of self, they can be easily conquered ideologically, continentally at any, because your history is one of the instruments and guide to ensure your existence within the context of political independence. Kurukam Furukam, as I said, Kuru mean assembly in Mandinka term, Fokam mean authority. Democracy is people authority, not so, democracy. So it means that already the concept was with Africa. And you people don't understand, failure to understand your history. You just try to link everything to Western civilization. You cannot change the current contemporary African situation until you build capacity in culture and history. And your economy will you remain peripheral because you don't understand how to even adopt or construct an economic system that is aligned to your existence. Sunjata Keita could not even assume power until when that law or constitution was put into force. And go and look at the chart provision of Kurkan Furkan laws and look at the human rights laws. That led to Malian expansion over this area where even if each of the territory or vassal state selected or elected a candidate as a governor or farim, you must travel to Mali so that your capacity could be built on the governance of the sub-region. They were doing capacity. That's where Semeke Jambe, Banajasi, Jalankonko, and Futa, whatever, went to Mali. 3-month capacity building training in governance, accordingly, so that they will not actually exercise unnecessary power against their citizens. How do you know all this? Because you don't know, because you are reading to understand the modern governance, thinking that white man was the originator of all this system. If people are not oriented, educated in history, because they adopt a system. Today, Gambia government adopt a British citizens. Sadauda came to power, adopted a British colonial system. The independence was completely irracialized independent. White man left. They adopted an internal structural system of how minority white, and they perpetuated minority Gambian elite forces who control the people, just like white man. But you know that all the governors were appointed, not so, by the government. During the colonial era, all the commissioners were appointed by the governor. Is it not today, up to Sadauda's time, commissioners were they not appointed by local government? So what has changed? You can't understand because your history in governance, you understand it based on the colonials, but you don't understand what we had. First of all, to actually examine the context of our independence and democracy. It's a sad situation for African people. It's a sad situation. Do we have such political governance where it constitutes people-driven and people-mandate? Sunjata could not make any decision. When Yomi King was a foreign governor, he could not do certain things because when he did, they were all supervised by Mali Empire. But what happened that constitutes a shift in global governance and politics? Your failure in history, even reinforce the significance of. Many of you don't even want your children to major in history. The white man makes you a capitalist personality. The only true pharaohs known is the pharaoh that had encounter with Moses. Not so? The pharaoh that had encounter with Joseph. Apart from there, whether Christianity or Islam, they know only two pharaohs, and most of them conceptualize or rationalize these pharaohs as white or Arabs. No! These were all black African people. Fir'aun Sarateta was a Serere. Fir'aun Sar was a Serere from Upper Egypt. Fir'aun Perbisen was a Serere, and Fir'aun Osotasen was a Serere. Most of the government don't know this. And this is what is going to lead us to how we fail in our independence into political or Republican sphere. You don't know this because most of you are thinking pharaohs were white people. Yes. Yes. But they were all black people because we were the first human being on earth. You're independent, you can't actually institute any form of civilization or independence if you are not culturally independent, because that has to do with your mind, your existence, your heritage. The Almighty God created first man in Africa. Let me tell you one thing, I'm going to push you down. Adam was created in Africa here. He was not created in heaven. Because there is no art, no clay in the up there, scientifically. And God didn't mention in the Quran or Bible where Adam was created. He said, I created this world in 6 days and I established my throne above the water. That's a Quranic verse. But the water signifies what? That's why when the early independent analysis, people who don't even know their history, it's an embarrassment. That's why history is supposed to be a call for every person in this country. It's a direction. So this was, at that time, Mali will rule in the 15th century. So Mali will rule in the 15th century. That coincided with the coming of the European capitalists. That was the time the European capitalist people, what happened? They had to move out because if not, at the time, Europe was initially a periphery of the world system. I am telling you how we lost our economic independence owing to influence of European and capitalist nations in the world. One, Europe had to engage Africa. Their relation with Africa actually was based on economic relation, legitimate trade, not initially slave trade. Until when America was discovered, strategic for European capitalist economic development. That was with time, in order for them to optimize production and to realize their economic agenda in American jurisdiction or continental zones, they needed labor force. And why were you people identified as labor force to give European agenda in the United States of America? Why? What must have saved European humanistic mind to subject his mind to understand that African personality desire to be enslaved? And this is the beginning where periphery in the global economy will begin. Because we are supplying human capital to Europe. And Europe could not just come to Africa to influence African people. When Mali withdrew owing to invasion of Songhai, so Malian withdrawal from Senegambian zone led Kabul to emerge, Jolof Empire to emerge in the 17th century, future Jalon Imamate emerged. Europeans were actually minority, One must have actually given them the opportunity and power to influence African states. Mali was independent in the world system. Ghana was independent. They crossed down and attempted imperial expansion of Arab from the North Africa or from the Middle East. And Ghana remained and existed as viable state. Mali came, it emerged. Shanghai came, emerged, until we had University of Sankore. That's supposed to be the basis of that shape our scientific knowledge and scientific direction, where we could compete with the European world as co-equals in the world system or in the global scientific system. Now, Kabul was actually situated very critically. Why was it that in the 16th century, slave trading and the export of slaves was actually instituted? Why? You don't have the technology and technological sophistication of the African states. That's why if you are dealing with economy in Africa, once your manipulation of technology is weak, you will remain as periphery of the world system. Go and read Walter Rostow, the stages of economic growth. Look at how we are influenced. European powers through Portuguese and subsequent France and England, they had to influence Kabul. That's why Kabul was never an African. The Nyanchos and the Koreans were never African personalities. Whoever might have thought of Kabul or whatever, my mother was a Kabulka. My mother was Mali. But I am telling you, Kabul, Koreans and Nyanchos were never African personalities. They were influenced and adopted a political and internal structural governance, structural change. This is where Korea and Nyankoya were actually inaugurated. One to provide defense for only the aristocrats. That is to militarize the state. They were actually accepting accommodated European weapons. And they actually opened the entire population under their rules and governance to vulnerability. Kabul began to raid and sell slaves. So you can understand that this was the period after the withdrawal of Mali, West African sub-Saharan population's independence and sovereignty ended at that time in the 16th century. Because your state like Kabul, Jolof, which were actually established according to the mandate of the people, according to the dictate of the people, they are already influenced and they shifted allegiance and they actually militarized and consolidated their position to defend the royals and to open people to enslavement. This was the beginning of the weakening of African state powers. Okay. So this was the time of that. So Kabul was a predatory state, Jolof was a predatory state, and that of the Futa Jalal Imamate was a predatory state. The end of the slavery was in the early 18th century. And in the 19th century, we can understand that they introduced, when Europe could not actually penetrate America after American War of Independence, African Jews, they must actually create or design a new form of relation with Africa, economic relation with Africa, centered on commodity or non-slave commodities. This is where period was introduced, where this will confirm how you end your economic independence. Cotton was introduced, other non-human commodities were introduced. They had to influence Africa to adopt this form of production system. That marked the end of your economy. So you can understand that in the 19th century, latter part of the 19th century, British intervened to end the mandate of Fode Silla Touré, to end the mandate of Fode Silla, number one, to end the mandate of Maba, to end the mandate of some of the judicial leaders. And their intervention led to actually territorial dismemberment of the Gambia. Gambia was dissolved into a district. All the chiefs who were appointed by the governors, not by our people. That confirmed the beginning of the end of the mandate. End of the mandate of the people of the Gambia. 62 years of European governance. They end our economy, they use their political governance and sophistication to influence their economic agenda. If Gambians were going for independence, for example, Sadauda, but we can tell you, Sadauda was not the initiator of Gambian independence. He never, when he was working for the British, Sadauda didn't have the initiative spirit or Pan-African spirit to even write against the colonial. The only person we can say who used formal space was Edward Francis Small. Apart from Edward Small, 6 elders from Congo here were the one who pursued the independence because they were the one who challenged the European the justification of the disenfranchisement of the people of the rural people. One farmer was a from Bunju, Fajombo Bojang, Fawadi Bojang, Sanjani Bojang, Trasek Dandamba, and the Fatu Sano of Fana. They were the one who had, they were not educated in conventional education. They questioned the justification of the disenfranchisement of the rural population until they were able to influence Europe, where they actually opened the scope of what? Electoral process to include the rural population. Sadauda never had. He was a capitalist personality, working for the veterinary. When these elders went to Dr. Marena, that was the time Dr. Marena recommended Sadauda. But when we talk about our independence, these people, the heroes were actually silenced. We never talk about that. So now, when Sadauda was allowed to get the independence with his colleagues, but these were African personalities at the Sadauda who never understand African history. Because European intervention to subject us to peripheral state in the global economy was as a result of the introduction of peanut. At the same time, non-human commodities. When they take the political mandate, they should actually dismantle and alter political structures that were actually utilized and manipulated by the colonialists to actually subject Gambians to that periphery in governance and economy. But Sadauda did not do that. The first government did not do that. Payment was one of the dangerous threats. And Sadauda came with Banjul Declaration. It was a theory. That is why in Guinea-Bissau, America Cabral, an agronomist, mobilized his people to fight against the promotion of peanut production because it was actually a threat to our ecology in Africa. From Karang down to Dakar, everywhere was deforested. Only to promotion of peanut because Sadauda and Senghor were all capitalist personalities. Look at the America Cabral. He fought against it. Today, 70% of the forest cover of Guinea-Bissau is intact. About 70% of the Gambian forest is gone because we promoted, instead of changing production or commercializing or commoditizing peanut, instead of commercializing rice or commodity, we promote peanut. At the end of the day, today, when Europeans adopted their ecological condition, arable for peanut cultivation, our peanut is not actually accepted in the market, world market. So we can say that our independence was not actually pursued in the right way. Personalities who were apart were not African personalities, because that's why Gambia and Senegal, you can see the frustration. That's why Senghor contributed to the killing of Anta Diop. And that not understand the world system and the trajectory and evolution within the context of global economy, to understand how African elites and the Gambian elites during the independence actually failed to examine and assess the colonial economic agenda centered on capitalist regime. Thank you so much.
Here in the Gambia, some. And the other thing also that some of the fellows were Sere. So I can imagine probably my big brother, the 5th was a direct descendant of the Pharaohs. Of course, we have said a lot of important things here, and the concept of democracy actually existed since the Mali Empire, so it is not a new concept which has been brought by the Europeans. And And a lot of other historical lessons, and I'm sure some of us would make the best use of it. And I understand there is supposed to be a third panelist, one online. Ali Hussein, are you around? Okay. You've heard about this important the topic which has been dealt with effectively by the two panelists. I mean, one was looking at it from the governance aspect. Of course, as I said, the African Center has been very much instrumental in organizing, governance forums and other things. So they are very vast in that area. Then you had from the historical perspective, perspective of governance from Dr. Sure. So on behalf of everybody else, I thank my panelists and I thank all of you also for being attentive to this issue. Thank you very much. Mr. Semedajani, you made some very, very pertinent issues, as far as the governance aspect is concerned. And so I'm not sure whether any of the panelists is willing to make a comment on those two issues.
Hello.
Salman?
Yeah. You see, historical background, that's why we fail in everything that we do. Sadada regimes could have actually dismantled peanut industry and commoditize or commodify rice, which is still our basic staple in this country. But failure to actually adopt and engage in peanut production for quite a number of years actually led us to a decline of the rice. Today we are depending on global market for the for importation of the rice. And you know the American rice today is not a good rice. Saddam, even that's why people are not educated. When people have the knowledge of self, there are certain things they will not expose themselves to that. They will reject most of the rice imported in this country. You all know how we even sing our lullaby because of the purity of the rice we produce in this country. If rice is commoditized, everyone will go there and they will get capital out of the rice cultivation. You know that the supply will be assured and then importation will be minimal. So this was what has not been because the state was interested in foreign exchange. But at the end of the day, they didn't understand scientific dynamism or technological dynamism of the world. When these people adopted their ground and their environment to actually cultivate peanut, ours was actually subjected to, has been subjected to quarantine, not so. And we are losing the price just because I am telling you something you don't understand. Why is it that? Because that industry is dead today and we cannot create any industry. Secondly, if a nation state is to be independent, you must make sure that you build people's capacity in governance. That is national sovereignty. Are you paying attention here? Here in the first place, that's why Kwame Nkrumah started building universities, science and technology. I think he sent an empty aeroplane to come and pick people to go and study free. Because he wanted to actually start his continental framework. The people's capacity need to be built. But what giant step did Sadara take in order to make sure build the capacity? He came with Testo as a theoretical propaganda, but Testo without corresponding technical capacity for the Gambians. Today, why is CSC building here in the Gambia? CSC built the road from here to Khartoum because Senegalese have the capacity. Well, and they are discussing all these profits in their country. Today, University of the Gambia, UTG Al Faraba, they are building it. And that company that is building UTG is called Saponji Polanji. It was established in 1864, 117 years ago. No technical capacity. You refuse to build the university, and even to make people to be awakened to know their world by rejecting them television station. That could help us to define the man as a soft dictator using institutional detachments. He's telling them so that he will be able to control them. That's why I Gambia better Nisoti. Gambia no Nisiake, Tola Pankora economy team. So what we are telling you is that look at the trajectories in capacity building. It's very poor. Well, do we have people, anybody in the country, more than 20 people with masters in the road engineering? In the road engineering, do you have that? How do you expect the economy? Indians are taking out all this because they are the one building. Because you refer to this because you're thinking that once people become awakened, your existence as a political leader is threatened. Even today, Gambians are adopting this attitude. University of the Gambia was established in 2000 or 1999. The geography department does not have a single Gambian with a PhD. Development studies, only 2 PhD. So you see the attitude of the Gambians. They don't want people to grow intergenerationally, and they are clamoring for independence. What kind of life is this? We need to change our mentality. Shadado should take incapacity. That's why we constrain it.
Sorry, Shadado has not been in power for more than 30 years. Time to look ahead.
Okay. In the 30 years, but even whatever, even 28 years.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ture. Thank you, Dr. Ture. I mean, we've got Philip Sen, do you want to say something?
Up to the zero period, I used to do history until at high school when I dropped it because of dates. I hated history then. Quoting dates because I couldn't remember the dates. I would know the story, but I couldn't attach it to the dates. So I dropped history. I have learned a lot from Tourist intervention here. I also have a part which I will dispute, and I have seen a lot of statements which I will say, what is your source of reference? I would like to see the source of reference. Let's put all those aside because you did us. Coming back for this 61 years, we have 3 administrations. We live on the Jawara, the first administrator, is unfair because that was the first company. And it was the colonial masters, they are still around when Jawara was. They didn't leave the Gambia 18 February 65. No, they were still here, holding offices and running offices. So, for that period of transition, the first republic, to be fair with him, he was on a good education. If you come the first day and you kick out everything, you are doomed. Then he achieved a lot. He failed in a lot. Of course, we did not excuse. But then we go to the second republic. That is where we should have obtained our momentum. But we diverted and went into dictatorship. These are the other things. Why did we go into that? Then we went into the third republic. Things are still not satisfactory. We have the 3 evils affecting us here. Is it the European level of corruption? How would we see the corruption with us happening now? The Franco habit, all our characters have been spoiled. It's not handling. So we need change our character for behavior, make the Gambian again. Yes, to make it Gambian, we need to go back to history to find out what was the attitude, what was the character. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.